Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg. So, right now, we're living in a world strife with anger, stress, and uncertainty. And the best way to cope is to start by changing your own life and the space around you. This will bring peace from the chaos and the negative, things that are just swirling around us all the time, and hopefully form meaningful relationships for life. Today, I have with us Jordan Birnbaum. He's the managing director of Jordan Birnbaum Consulting, which provides behavioral science based learning and development and behavioral audits to clients. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Patricia. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
I asked you to come on to the show today because we are now in September, which is National Healthy Aging Month. And one of the basics of healthy aging is emotional health. And I really see a need for this discussion among the aging population, whether it's business, personal, so we can make the later in life more peaceful and purposeful. So tell us about your work.
Well, gosh, it's so interesting. I would say if there's like one element that connects all of my work, it's the understanding that we have a limited amount of mental energy available to us each day
Right.
and spend most of our time every day in automatic pilot.
Right.
And only about 5 to 10% of our time each day is spent in like seriously contemplative thinking. And so one of the mistakes that are really common for us to make either as individuals or in business is to communicate to people expecting them to be giving you their attention when they're not. And
Mm.
so one of the most important skills that we can learn that we can develop is understanding how do you reach people when they're on automatic pilot? What are
Right.
the ways in which you can actually grab their attention when they're not really thinking clearly? And that's really what behavioral science is all about. I come to behavioral science through industrial and organizational psychology. And I think one of the areas where you and I probably intersect quite a bit is I was really motivated to understand how do you create healthy environments in which people thrive. I've come to understand the significance of your work environment on your life.
Yeah.
And when you're in an unhealthy work environment, just how miserable that really can be. And so part of me wants to figure out ways to make that better. I think in the same way that you're trying to understand as we go through life and what are the things that we can do to make sure that we're getting the most out of the experience. And so in that regard, I think you and I are listening to the same cosmic radio station.
Yeah. 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 That's a great way of putting it. You in reading through your work, you talk a lot about empathy and sympathy in your work.
Yeah.
Let's discuss these traits and why they're important. And you're so hitting the nail on the head. It's personal, it's business, it's even the relationship you have with yourself. To take a good look at how you live, and you may be unhappy or you may be stressed out, and you think, well, what am I doing to continue that path, and or what can I do to prevent that?
Well, gosh, both empathy and sympathy are really great topics, but there's just one thing that you said there that just sparked something in my head about when people are feeling unhappy. I think that we sometimes forget it's really easy to be happy if that's what you want. And if you want to be happy, be kind. That's it. Just go out and be nice to people, and you will feel happy. And so, if that is really what you're after, it's not hard to do. And sometimes I like to remind people that, there's a really easy way to feel good, which is just go be nice to people.
Mm.
And that's not my opinion. That's not rainbows and unicorns. That's data.
Right.
Yeah. And so with regards to empathy and sympathy, so the difference between the two of them, sympathy is feeling bad for someone, where empathy is understanding what someone is feeling. And so for me, the best example of this is that if you've never owned a pet and one of your close friends loses a pet, all you can have for them is sympathy, to just say, I feel bad for you. I know, this must be painful. But you can't understand what they're going through. Only another pet owner can understand the depths of that kind of pain. And so that's a good example of empathy and sympathy. And one of the reasons why I think empathy is so crucial, I think one of the ways that we can be most unhappy is by getting caught inside of ourselves. And by only experiencing the world through our perspectives and our own experiences and our own needs. And ironically, that is actually a really fast path to unhappiness.
Mhm.
When we become aware of other people, of their needs, of the ways in which we are affecting them, we not only put ourselves in position to be more likable and to develop healthier relationships, but we ourselves start to feel much happier. It's much more proportional. Sometimes I think when we get too stuck in our own heads, or we're running away from our own emotions, it's like living in a fun house that's never fun, where
Right.
just everything's always disproportionate. And so, yeah, I think it's really important that we can sort of come back to this idea of like, wow, there's a lot of other people out there who are dealing with quite a bit, and that can help us feel better as well.
Can you speak to what makes a person more or less empathetic?
I don't know. In terms of how they got that way, I suppose I don't know.
Right.
There's probably some combination of childhood experience, some genetic makeup, some personality stuff. But when people have empathy, they find themselves really able to experience other people's perspectives. And so that doesn't only elicit a sense of compassion, um, or a sort of underlying desire to connect and say, I understand how you're feeling, and I'm hoping that you're knowing that I understand that makes you feel a little bit better. There's just, I think, a general thoughtfulness around the people around you that comes with empathy. And the more that you're aware that your actions affect other people, the more powerful your sense of empathy. And one of the nice things about it, even from like a Machiavellian perspective, even if you're not trying to act with good intention, is you need empathy to understand what other people are going through so that you're able to reach them. Even if your intentions aren't good, empathy would help you. Ironically, it's there's a wonderful quote from Ender's Game. I'll paraphrase it, which is, "To defeat my enemy, I must understand him. However, as soon as I understand him, I no longer want to defeat him." So sometimes, like if I'm trying to fool somebody who I don't think has good intentions, I'll try to get them to start thinking about how other people are feeling as an intention, as an incentive to figure out how best to communicate with them, but secretly they're actually going to discover something much deeper and more emotional.
I think we've all experienced it. We've all seen it in other people where someone might be rude or inappropriate to another person. And then you point it out and they say, wow, I didn't even realize I was doing that. Or another person might say, oh, yeah, and too bad I did it on purpose just to get them back. Like you're absolutely right. There's intentional and non intentional consequences, from these behaviors. And again, we can't analyze every human being and why they're
Right.
the way they are, but I find it fascinating. What I
Me
also
too.
find, Jordan, if you could speak to this, we live in an incredibly stressful society right now, and it's very easy for us to say, well, shut the TV off or shut your phone off and don't listen to it and turn a deaf ear to what you're hearing and a blind eye to what you're seeing. But the reality is it is all over us. And so I think people are, unfortunately, I think you alluded to it earlier, we're all running around in survival mode on that automatic pilot, that I need to get what I need right now in order to survive, in order to be here. So, can we talk a little bit about what the stress and anxiety does? Because stress and anxiety is the number one ailment today. It gets in the way of caring for yourself, other people, work, home, whatever it is. Do you have some techniques about dealing with the anxiety that we're faced with, even in the worst of situations?
Oh, for sure. So speaking it out loud is unquestionably the most powerful thing that you can do. When you are feeling a sense of anxiety, it can be incredibly helpful to force yourself to say, why am I feeling anxious? Because I keep going until you get to the root of the anxiety. And if you can actually speak it out loud, it will have a huge impact on reducing the power of that anxiety, and it will really give you a sense of domain over it. And if you say it to someone else, that's has the effect on steroids. And so, one of the things that I think that the human condition simply requires is talk therapy. I think that it is crucial for us to understand that we are going to endure unavoidable suffering in life, and our brains are wired to keep us from feeling those feelings in a sort of self-protective mode, back from when the possibility of becoming emotionally paralyzed could actually be fatal. Our brains are still operating on that mode.
Yeah.
And so it's stopping us from feeling the feelings we need to feel in order to be happy. And so we're all sort of starting off in this place of we're behind the eight ball of suppressed emotion coming out of childhood. And so I think the more that we can embrace therapy as really a necessary tool for the human condition, the better off we're all going to be. I would say that from my perspective, if there's like a legacy that I can contribute to, it would be like, let's normalize therapy and just say like everyone needs it. If you're human, you need it. And that's not even benevolent. That's also like, I want to stop dealing with people who need therapy. Like they're not fun. So let's get everyone in therapy so my life can be better. But I would say specifically, that's pretty meta, like very micro. It's just talk about it, get it out loud. And then interestingly, I think that you made a great point. I'm going to share something that has come up a lot in my therapy where I have found balancing my concern for what's going on in the world and maintaining sufficient focus on my own life to be challenging. And he did, I'm going to sound smart here, even though I never read it. But there is a book called Candide by Voltaire. And what my therapist explained to me was that he talked about his entire life and an extraordinary life he led. He did everything, he experienced everything. And when everything was said and done, the only happiness that he ever really found was tending to his own garden.
Hmm.
And so I try to keep that in mind, that clearly we are connected to community and society, and we cannot put our heads in the sand. There's degrees of activity that we have to engage in. But how much of our time do we spend thinking about it? How much are we leaving the news on in a loop where we're not learning anything new, but just repeating the damage being done to us? And so I think for all of us, finding the right balance between I know it's happening, I know it needs what I need to do, I know where I need to be when I need to be there, and then getting back to tending to your own garden. That is, I think, one of the most important things that we can learn to do in life. And I don't think any of us ever gets it right. It's always going to be a struggle.
Jordan, I'm going to go back now and read that book because that's very, very profound. And
Yeah.
so much of what you're saying is that again, there's something about in our society, especially with older people. I'm in my 60s, and I am very, very open to help. I always have been, but it is taboo still among some of the older generation of getting therapy, getting help, bearing your soul onto the table. And when I get resistance, and when I suggest it to people and I get resistance, it's always like, oh, I can't let anybody know I'm feeling that way, or I'm not going to call a perfect stranger and pay them $100 an hour. I think now it's 200 an hour to tell them all this. So help me encourage people to go do that. What is your, in a
So
nutshell,
I would say, it's funny. Like sometimes we just, with people who are resisting, in reality, they're being driven by fear. When people are intensely resisting talking about their feelings, it's because that is a very unappealing prospect to them. And so, I think that were I dealing with someone in that kind of environment, I might try to just sort of demonstrate, give them a small taste of what it's like, like what annoys you the most every day? Something that probably would be easy for them to answer and wouldn't feel like therapy. And then it would just maybe give them an opportunity to see what it's like of just sharing with somebody like what annoys you, and then hear what about that is so frustrating. And you know, thinking about it, is there, when you encounter it next, like how do you hope you're going to be able to deal with it? And I think that like you could just sort of get people talking without realizing that that's what they're doing. And my hope would be then, and this is ironically a wonderfully therapeutic, maybe ironic or fittingly, but it's not giving them the answer, it's leading them to the answer themselves, because otherwise it won't stick. So yeah, I think that might be the best bet, that when you encounter that kind of resistance, expose them to the process, show them what it feels like, without them having to make a scary jump.
It's a wonderful, wonderful recommendation, because everyone thinks they're compassionate, they're empathetic. I'm a nice guy. I'm sweet. I care about everybody. I'm kind. People aren't. But in reality, I think most people, especially in the state of anxiety or fear, they're only thinking about themselves. And it's very easy to look at someone and say that person's totally selfish. All they care about themselves. And like you said, they're in fear. They're not sitting here, I hate everybody. All that's important is me. It's like, oh my God, am I going to count in this world? Am I going to
Mhm.
get what I need in this world? I never did before. How can I have faith now that I'm going to have it today? And it's a very unfortunate prevailing theme in a
You know
lot of.
what's even worse than that?
Mhm.
Certainty that you won't get it,
Yeah,
certainty that you're not
yeah,
anyone.
yeah.
And that is sometimes, maybe the people who are afraid are the ones who are like, oh, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And the people who are certain that it's all bad are the ones who say, yeah, I meant to do it. Because once you hit that point, all your only desire is to make everyone feel as bad as you.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about that in my work and talking about helping people age well and embrace aging is getting, if there's some way you can throw vengeance out the window, revenge serves zero purpose. Anger is a normal emotion, jealousy, fear, they pop up. You can't, it rears its ugly head no matter how old you get, it's always there. But trying to exact revenge on someone, it only hurts you. I tell people that all the time. It's glamorized in the movies and books and everything else, but it will ruin your life if you're walking around feeling vengeful towards people. So that's
I
something.
just want to say I so agree with that. And I think the reason why is that I think that a desire for vengeance is an expression of pain. And so if you are seeking vengeance, it means that you have pain that has not been resolved. And that when you really, when you have like the kind of cry that you have when you're in therapy and you uncover like your deepest hurt from childhood, and like you let that is this super powerful cry that leaves you with no energy, like the idea of vengeance when you're in that state is like so absurd.
Mhm.
And so, to me, again, I hate to sound like a broken record about like the solution to everything is to get mentally healthy, and the way to get mentally healthy is through therapy, but that's the only way to do it. And you can't use your friends, you can't use your
Right.
spouse, you can't use
Right.
your family. Those are not therapists. You cannot be honest with them. And the feedback that they provide you, as well-intentioned as they may be, will only reflect what they need from you. And it has nothing to do with what's good for you because, as you said, Patricia, people are so locked into their own perspectives.
Jordan, how did you come to specialize in this field, like in such a unique way?
It's a really, well, there's one really funny story and one kind of hard story. The funny story is I've been very lucky in my career. I've been in a lot of right places at right times to have some extraordinary opportunities in very different environments. And so, in one stage of my career, I was managing 40 salespeople for an internet company, and in another, I was managing 40 security guards for a nightclub.
Wow.
And I had a really significant insight when I was training my security guards, which was this plan is really simple. Like, all I have to do is get these guys to care. And so the whole training, I just focused on getting them to care. And I realized, that's kind of what I did with my salespeople too. And once I made that connection, it just sort of it was like leadership's about getting people to care. And then it kind of changed when I would wake up in the morning and look at my day. I kind of had a different take on things. And so that really stayed with me powerfully. And so that's ultimately after I sold the venue, which was in LA, by the way. It was called the
Mhm.
Vanguard,
Mhm.
on Hollywood Boulevard between Gower and Bronson.
Yep, round the corner from me. Yep.
Yeah,
Mhm.
there you go.
Uh-huh.
So I'm sorry if we ever kept you up late at night. But so I went back to school and got my master's in IO psychology. And one of the wonderful things about going to school later in life, and I encourage everyone to do it. My guess is that the later in life you go to school, the more you get out of it.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
But when I got my master's, so I went back to school, I was 40 something, early 40s. I learned nothing. Every single thing that they taught in leadership or motivation or culture or organizational development, it's like, yep, knew that, knew that. I knew how to do that. And for a minute, you feel cocky.
Yes.
Then what I realized was, wait a second, I'm only thinking of all the times I remember to do that. What about all the times I didn't? And I realized that up until that moment, everything I had been doing had been instinctual, and who knew how many opportunities I was missing. But once I learned the names of these things, that's the game changer. Because when you can name something, you can start to do it on purpose.
Mm.
That was the power for me of going back to school. Whereas if I went into grad school right after undergrad, I wouldn't know what any of these things were taught that people were talking about. I had no context. But going back after having so much experience, you start to learn the names of the things you've been doing your whole life. That is transformational, and I love it. But the other answer is because that I think just sort of concerns itself with how I view life in organizations and how to sort of create the best environments. I think that my particular emphasis on therapy is also I grew up in a really dysfunctional childhood and have had without therapy probably would not have had anything close to the life that I've had. So it's for both my sister and me, who we remain close, it was an absolute requirement to have anything close to a normal life. And I think that, when you experience that, as bad as our childhood was, everyone has a bad childhood because everyone's childhood is filled with emotional experiences that we are not yet equipped to deal with. And so we all are forced to suppress emotion when we're kids because we can't deal with it,
Mhm.
which means we all emerge with baggage that we've been burying and we have to learn how to access it. And because that process was so extreme for me, it helped me see it a little bit more clearly. One of the things that I say is it was an advantage to have such a terrible childhood for me because if I only had a mildly bad childhood, I don't think I would have been forced to do the kind of healing I was doing, and I would probably be living sort of like partially unhappy and kind of numb. But because it was so bad, I had to do something to have an okay life, and
You
that
know,
in some ways has given me the
yeah.
best.
I was going to say, Jordan, at what age did you come to the realization that you grew up in a dysfunctional family? I
Well,
mean,
so I
you
knew
know it from birth. We all do. But I'm so
28. 28 was the moment that
okay.
so part of my dealing with it, I was the star of the family. And so I sort of kept everything together
Mhm.
and developed quite a God complex as a result. But of course was an agony every day.
Right.
And I just sort of hit rock bottom at 28. Just got involved in a horrible relationship with a terrible person, and I knew it, and I just couldn't even understand why I was doing it, and I just finally had this moment of like, I don't think I'm okay, even though I'd spent my entire life telling myself that I was okay,
Mhm.
and then thank God I found the right person, and we're still together. So I was 28, I'm 53, I still have the same therapist,
Oh, wow. Wow. Wow.
and we'll keep going.
So
And
you grew up to, yeah, you grew up together. You grew up with this person.
oh,
Yeah.
he saved my life. He's his impact on me has been beyond extraordinary.
Wow. Wow. You know, do you find you obviously have become a very thoughtful, and that's my new word, that's my new mantra, is doing things thoughtfully from eating to talking to people to sleeping, whatever it is thoughtful, is thought through and done methodical, not crazy and obsessive, but just really thinking about it, thinking about the consequences it has on you and on me and everybody around me. So do you find that through your work and your coaching and your managing people, do you find that one can become thoughtful? Is
Oh
it,
yeah.
and become that sympathizing friend, that person? Can you, and I'm talking more, I think, in the context of repairing relationships. Is Talk to us about that a little bit.
Well, take the first part of it, which is, so one of my beliefs is that every human being, when they are at their best, is naturally curious. When I think about everyone at their best, I tend to think, which by the way includes not only their own mental health, but also the environment in which they are in the moment that we're looking at. But when I think about everyone at their best, many of the problems that we encounter aren't problems anymore. But what really, I think, contributes to it is just this unresolved pain. And that in most cases, when people start to experience what it's like to release it, their whole worlds change. So, for example, the way that when I was in my 20s, I was a very effective jerk executive. And I was very successful and I was not nice. And this is pre-therapy. This is when I was being driven by mania and angst and the amount of horrible stuff happening in my head didn't allow me the capacity to have any understanding of other people. I was way too much caught up in myself. And
Mhm.
so, um, in feeling and releasing my pain, it then allowed me the opportunity to be like, oh, wait, there's other people here. Also, for what it's worth, I did group therapy, which was hugely important for me.
Wow. Wow. That's brave.
Um,
That's beyond brave. That's
oh, it's massive. Because here's the thing, in therapy, you still control everything. You have a great deal of control on where the conversation goes and what you reveal. But when you get in with a group of people and they can press your buttons, yeah, you lose control. And yeah, group gets wild. But
yeah.
it with the right people and in the right circumstances, it is unbelievably helpful to understand the impact that you're having on other people.
So Jordan, coming from such a severely dysfunctional background, becoming the jerk you were, and then finding therapy. Um, what was the transformation in trust for you? What, because now you trust the universe, and I'm sure you trust certain people around you, but you trust the process. That doesn't happen overnight. I'm curious how that maybe we can encourage the listeners that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that there's a time that comes. And I'd like to know that transforming moment for you when you realized I can trust this process. I can let go and know that my life is going to be okay.
I'm going to give you a very counterintuitive answer here.
Okay.
I think that one of the ways that I dealt with all of my dysfunction prior to therapy was in grandiosity. And so at my most unhealthy, I was trusting in grandiose ideas about myself. And then whenever reality would interrupt those things, I would take them very hard, but then bounce back with the grandiose ideals. And sometimes my ability in those cases to be resilient was desperation to fulfill those sort of grand ideals. The reason my answer, I suppose, is counterintuitive is that one of the things that I had to learn how to do was to stop trusting myself, and to stop trusting. It's almost like there were different voices in my head, and I had to learn which ones I should listen to and which ones I shouldn't. And that remains a challenge, and I think probably will be for my whole life. Um, so the idea of letting go and trusting is so layered and complicated for me because of what my particular strategy was for how to deal with my combination of circumstances, makes the idea of trusting myself a really complicated one. Now, what's the difference between trusting yourself and trusting the universe? I would say this: I am finding the universe and I are getting along better these days than we ever have before. So I'll say that a lot of really nice things are happening, and I feel like I'm being connected with the right people for me to have, the best version of myself.
That's wonderful. So it's just very life enhancing for you at this point.
Yeah.
Um, when I was going through researching you and some of the things that you've said in interviews, and I do a lot of homework before I have someone on. What are the downsides to becoming a kinder, more empathetic, sympathetic person?
You heard a lot. So one of the things that happens, or at least what I have found, and the analogy that I share is, it's almost like we are a stage with a curtain that opens in the middle. Stage right is happiness, stage left is pain. The farther you go in either direction, the more intense the experience. And the only question you have is, how much are you going to open your curtains? Because the amount of happiness that you feel is going to be directly proportionate to the amount of pain that you can tolerate. And so, from that perspective, I think the meaning of life is to keep my curtains all the way open and try to sort of center myself in the middle of the stage and feel everything, overwhelmed by nothing. That's sort of my ideal state. And so, you know, there's no ride at the amusement park that's only fun. Like that's just not how life works. And so if you want to experience kindness and joy, you have to be prepared to cry a lot, and if you want to love your dog and have the best possible life with your dog, you are going to have the most painful goodbye imaginable. And so here's the question: are you gonna go for it and get the most out of your life with your dog, or are you gonna keep them emotionally distant so it doesn't hurt as much when you lose them?
That's very, very profound, and I think that's your analogy really holds with people also.
Yeah.
Jordan, I want to ask you lastly when we talk about you train people, you manage, and I'd imagine there's times you have to step away also. That I'm curious how the effect of working on getting people to be more sympathetic, team player, if you will, embracing the world in a good way rather than a vengeful, hateful way. How do you process that while you're working on that?
It's funny. I think that back when I was in my 20s and sort of maybe projecting this vision of who I wanted to be based on my fantasies of pleasing my parents to the extent that we'd be safe.
Mhm.
I was very extroverted, very much the life of the party, the most popular, like the star. And anytime that I had trouble fulfilling that in real life, it was just sort of um, kind of crippling. And so I think that for me, in that persona, I was very extroverted. The real me is not. That was an act and exhausting. I now believe that we're all ambiverts, that we all are extroverted and introverted, and it depends on how we slept last night and when's the last time we went out, and so I don't believe that that's actually a characteristic, but I certainly know that I need to spend a lot of downtime at home with my wife and dog, zoning out. I do a lot of writing, and that is really important for me because some of the more difficult ideas that I can encounter, it's the same way I said that articulating your anxiety makes you feel better. Writing about some of the inherent challenges of humanity and doing it in a way in which I hope that somebody reading it, it's actually they're going to feel a little bit better afterwards. Yeah, that's a really great way for me to deal with it. But for other people, I think that it's just finding the desire to feel everything, including your pain, knowing what that will do for the rest of your life. I really do think that that is the most transformative thing that we can do.
It's absolutely wonderful. This has just been an excellent discussion, and
Likewise.
giving me tremendous insight into what this takes, and because there's always so much to learn about the human condition.
Endless.
For more information to reach you, Jordan, what's the best way people can get in touch with you?
LinkedIn at Jordan Birnbaum, on Twitter X at Jordan Birnbaum, but also my favorite thing these days is I'm writing a blog for Psychology Today. So if you go to Psychology Today and search my name, you will see I have a blog called The Uncertainty Principle, and it's about all the stuff that we're talking about. They're all less than 1,000 words every article, so pretty fast reads. And I'm really putting a lot of my joy into that right now. And so hopefully whoever gets to engage with it will find it meaningful.
Terrific, and we'll post those when the show is up as well.
Thank you.
Jordan Birnbaum, so lovely to have you here. And of course, lastly, I want to ask, what do you like about getting older?
The View. I I believe that there's been studies that show that people get happier as they get older, and I absolutely believe it. The understanding what matters to me and the effect that that has on my ability to be in the present and to affect my current reality. It's just sort of night and day. Understanding and having the experience now that like the fastest way for me to feel good is to just be nice to people. Um, so that there's just all these sort of lessons. And also I think that I feel like I can float because I've lived most of my life with insanely heavy ankle weights, and all the time and work that I put into therapy has been about getting those things off. And it took me 50 years to get to the point where I really became my authentic self. And so now I'm just praying for medical technology to give me another 50 so I can enjoy it.
I was just going to say, I think you have plenty of years. Jordan, I wish you all the best and all the health and happiness for at least 50 more years.
I absolutely love this conversation, Patricia, and I really admire what you're doing. And
Thank you.
I think you have a lot to be proud of.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you who are listening. I'm Patricia Greenberg, and for more shows on aging well, please subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And for more information, feedback, and topic ideas, you can reach me at www.patriciagreenberg.com. Stay well and stay safe. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jordan.
I loved it.